Hello, Profata. Can you hear me? Hello.
Hello, sir.
Àlàáfíà àwọn ṣé dáadáa lẹ́wà.
Àdúpẹ́ báwo lọ́hún o.
Kò bá di o.
Ẹnlẹ́, sir.
Thank God. Thanks for the
Yes,
invite.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank God.
Yes, sir. Ọ̀gá máa come, ọ̀gá ti wà around náà, so wọ́n á bá wa sọ̀rọ̀ later.
Ṣé Professor Olúpọ̀nà ẹ̀ ń sọ?
No, Professor Akinriyade, the president of NAL.
Oh, okay, mi mọ̀.
Yes, so they will take over as soon as possible.
Okay, no
Yes,
worries.
sir. Thank you. Ẹ
Ẹ
ṣeun,
kúrò
sir.
lẹ́sà.
Ẹ kúrò lẹ́mẹ̀ o.
Ẹ rán sà. Mo wà lórí ìdọ̀bálẹ̀ o. Ẹ kúrò sàlàfíà lẹ́wà.
Okay, Professor Albert.
Bẹ́ẹ̀ni. Ẹ ṣeun wá gan ni o.
Ẹ ṣeun ẹ̀yin ní káàkì.
The first challenge ni pé ẹ gbọ́dọ̀ join NAL o.
Okay.
Mo ti sọ fún wọn.
Fọ́ọ̀mù yín ẹ gbọ́dọ̀ fill ẹ̀ kíákíá.
À sọ̀rọ̀ benefit and gbogbo ẹ̀ nígbà náà.
Ó dà. Ẹ ṣe pọ̀ sà.
Ìgbà tí mo wá sí UI ní last year mi ò hàn jẹ mo wá bá Professor Olúpégbà.
Okay.
Deputy Vice Chancellor lórí kíni admin kan náà.
Bẹ́ẹ̀ni Ọlápégbà. Ọlápégbà bẹ́ẹ̀ni.
Yes, wọ́n ti ẹ̀ mention yín fún mi nítorí wọ́n sọ pé kí n wá give talk náà but just mention.
And he's a very close person sí mi o.
Bóyá ọkọ̀ wọ́n fò.
Pẹ̀lẹ́ sà, ẹ kúṣẹ́.
Àwa nìyẹn, ẹ ṣeun mo dúpẹ́.
Ẹ ṣe, thank you.
Ẹ ṣe.
Ẹ káàsán o, ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n Albert.
How are you? Ẹ pẹ̀lẹ́.
Prof.
How are you?
Adúpẹ́ lọ́wọ́ Ọlọ́run sà. Thank you so much, sir.
That's fine. Ẹ pẹ̀lẹ́.
Ẹ ṣeun wá sà.
Yes, ẹ ṣé. Nice to see all of you.
Happy to see you too.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
Professor Da Silva, ẹ ṣeun wá o.
Ẹ̀yin ló ṣẹ́jú o, ẹ kú iṣẹ́ ọpọlọ.
Tó bá gbèsè lé wa lọ́wọ́ táwọn èèyàn bá dá sí wa ńkọ́. Ẹ̀rí pé ìjà náà gbé fún chairmanship tèmi.
Kì í ṣe irú yìí náà máa gbéṣẹ́ fún táwọn èèyàn ní rálíra. Ẹ ti ṣiṣẹ́ lẹ́pẹ́tẹ́ sílẹ̀.
The good Lord honor all of you, sirs. Ẹ ṣé o.
Amen.
Ẹ ṣé sà.
How are you, sir? Hey, you are muted.
Okay,
Hello,
thank you.
Prof.
Yes, sir.
How are you, sir?
I did can't pay
Ẹ
you.
ṣé o.
Yes,
Iṣẹ́
sir.
tẹ́ gbélé wa lọ́wọ́ là ń ṣe o.
We thank God. We thank God, sir.
Ẹ ṣé gbogbo nǹkan lọ.
Aduke, we thank God.
Ẹ ṣé o.
Àwọn èèyàn mi kan, Professor Sogulu, sir. Good evening, sir.
How are you?
Happy New Year, sir.
Happy New Year to you.
Thank
Professor
you so
Abbott,
much, sir.
how are you?
My oga, how you dey, sir?
Everybody, we are fine, no?
You are getting younger and younger.
How can? That is unnatural.
No, it's philosophical, sir.
I know.
Yes. I came to a meeting recently in Abuja here, and they said those of us who are in the university that
Yes.
we complain every day, but our faces are getting younger. So I asked the person, I said, are you envious? Because each time we come to you for support, you don't give us. He said, well, you just go and manage yourself, that we have our own strategies of managing our problems.
You see?
Professor Ogunyemi, good afternoon, sir.
Tayo, how are you?
Afternoon.
Yes, sir. Sir. How are you, sir?
How are you?
Happy New
Year.
Happy New Year, sir. We thank God, sir.
Good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Ogunyemi. Yes, sir.
Yes, you go on.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Here, picture
Gbogbo
yìí,
ẹ̀yin
sir.
tẹ́ ń look younger. Ó
rí picture mi.
dà ipá gbolẹ̀
Bẹ́ẹ̀ni,
mú.
bẹ́ẹ̀ni, sir.
Agbóni o, kò sí oúnjẹ gidi àgbàlámù o.
Bẹ́ẹ̀ni, sir. It's okay, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Let it be clearer.
Yes, sir. It can be clearer, yes.
Let's see we can be clearer.
Yes, sir. Professor Da Silva, sir.
Yeah.
Ẹ kú ọlá o.
Ranka Dede, sir.
Yeah.
Báńkà dẹ́dọ̀ gan ni o.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Ẹ kú
Thank you,
iṣẹ́
sir.
ọpọlọ.
Yes,
Ẹ
sir.
ṣé.
Olúwa là ń bẹ̀ lọ́jọ́ láwa o.
Ó kúkú wà.
What's the address?
Bọ́lá ń dúró
Orí Olúwa là ń bẹ̀ lodge.
What's the address? So,
Professor Sogolo, ẹ kú iṣẹ́ ṣá o. It's Da Silva.
So, sit. I have my water. Okay.
Yeah.
It's a minute past 5 o'clock. I'd like to request that the chairperson, Professor Albert, kick off this program.
Thank you so much, sir. Our elders in NAL, our president, Professor Shola Akinriade, FNLA, and his other ESCO members, fellows and members of the academy, Professor Jacob Olupana, the chair of today's presentation. We especially thank you for accepting this invitation. Professor Ogunyemi, our seminar presenter, our guests from different parts of the world. We welcome you to the first in our series of NAL seminars and roundtables for the year 2025. We have lined up an array of papers to be presented, and we thank you for joining this first edition. Before we move further, I want to hand over to our president to formally address us. This is the first seminar in the year, and this is also our first outing since Professor Tayo Adesina handed over to us a platform that we are all proud of and that we are seeking to further strengthen. So I will invite my president to address us and instruct us accordingly, because he said he has a number of things to also share with us as an exercise that will be part of today's engagement. Professor Akinriade, FNLA, I invite you, sir, to address us, sir.
Good evening, distinguished members, fellows members, and guests of the Academy. Let me appreciate all of us for joining promptly. I'm sure we're still going to have a lot more people joining in the course of the evening. This is our first dialogue session for the year, and it promises to be an engaging one. I'm not going to take a lot of our time starting. Just to first appreciate Professor Ogunyemi for starting us off this year and hoping that he will pick up his membership of the Academy as an overseas member, ultimately. And of course, to thank Professor Jacob Olupana, one of my mentors, who has been there for us. And when I called him a couple of days ago, that he's going to chair the thing, he didn't even hesitate to accept. So I'm going to hand over to him now. I'll make my comments after this session. So, Professor Olupana, I'd like to hand over to you to moderate today's session. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Professor Akinriade, for the invitation, and Professor Isaac Albert for contacting me. I'd like to say Happy New Year to all of us and to welcome us to this first seminar of the Nigerian Academy of Letters, which I know will be the beginning of new things for us this year. I must say that I'm really surprised that the degree of thanks and recognition that came with this invitation. And I said to, I think, Professor Akinriade, that I'm a member of the Academy. I don't think I need any vouching. to play my role in the academy. You notice that I never missed any meeting except for last year when I had really a distraction somewhere. So I had to recover and then return to US. So I'm quite pleased to welcome Professor Olatunji Ogunyemi to deliver this first seminar. But permit me to say one or two things as, forms of introduction to it. It is very likely that at first when we see the topic, we are kind of traumatized ourselves and say, hey, what are we talking about here? Are we, what has trauma got to do with the humanities? If I can put it that way. Then I realized that as I look at it more critically, I realized that this is a very, very important topic for all of us. And we may see it in unexpected places. Whether we are doing historical research, that is, we spend our time in the archives, or we are doing textual analysis or textual scholarship, or we are even doing the most interesting and fascinating, which is ethnographic work, the kinds of things people like me do. We are faced with this issue, and whether we like it or not, we have to, respond to it. For example, you're reading in the archives and then all of a sudden you come across certain episodes and narratives that probably relate to your ancestors that you recognized. And they are not good stories, actually. And you are confused and you don't know what to, you began to think about it. You may even forget about the content of the materials you are trying to understand. That's just one example. And of course, for those who do ethnographic studies and do hard work, like investigating rituals and festivals, and you see certain patterns that are pretty traumatic, and you have to respond to that. So we are grateful to Dr. Ogunyemi, who has agreed to take the lead in discussing a very, very serious issue. Particularly in contemporary Nigeria today, where our lives, our culture, given new interpretation and new meaning, can be seen in the context of this presentation. So let me just say one or two things about today's speaker. He's a professor of journalism at the School of Education and Communication, University of Lincoln. He's also the founder of an international multidisciplinary journalism, education, and trauma research group, and the media of Diaspora Research Group. So he's an adjunct professor at Bowen University. Professor Ogunyemi is a member of the AHRC peer review group, ensuring that the highest quality of research proposals receive funding in accordance with robust and transparent decision-making processes. So I'm hoping that some of our junior colleagues are here. So it's not a sin to make sure that you connect with him and find out about this aspect of his work. He's an expert in it. He's also a member of the UKRI Talent Peer Review, called PRC, ensuring funding for early career researchers and innovators with outstanding potentials. He is a senior academic mentor of the College of Mentors at the Council for the Development of Research Council, CODESTRA, working to strengthen capacity building in teaching, research, and mentoring. And we can go on and on and on. So I want to, on your behalf, welcome him to this session. It will take about 40 minutes to, to present his paper, and he's very much interested in making it an interactive section. So he's promised to do that. And then after that, we will have time for questions and answers. So thank you, Professor Ola Ogunyemi. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In fact, Chair, you've done half of my job for me by preparing the mind of my listeners, the audience today, as to the relevance of this topic to humanities and everything that we do. Now, I want to stand on existing protocol and thank everybody who have organized this, NAL, thank you very much for inviting me. And then it's a pleasure to be able to give a talk to a gathering of esteemed scholars. The topic today is researching traumatizing topics, building resilience among scholars. If I have to summarize this topic in one sentence, it's about how you protect yourself or your mental health and the mental health of your tutees against research-related trauma. Now, I'm going to scroll down so that, yes, there are just 3 objectives that we want to achieve today. First, I would like to raise awareness of research-related trauma among supervisors and scholars. Many of us are supervisors, but we take it for granted that we are actually vulnerable to vicarious trauma, or that our tutees are also vulnerable. That's why I like the example that Professor Olupon gave. Even when you do archival research, can you imagine how much, you might think, oh, it's just ordinary something, just go and collect text and read and things like that. And you come across disturbing stories and also things like that. They can traumatize you and your students. So we need to raise more awareness about that. We also need to promote an understanding of the symptoms of trauma. And because many of us are not psychologists, we don't actually associate what we do with what we are feeling. So this will come up in today's talk. And then we'll be preferring adjustive strategies for coping with the emotional effects of this exposure. So there will be some strategies that people have been using that are not good. They call it maladjustive, but we'll be talking about the adjustive one so that we can know exactly what to do when we encounter situations like this. Now, because this sort of topic does not give itself or lend itself to using standard, teaching approaches. It's going to be a blend of talking and discussing and things like that. So there will be some storytelling along the way as well. So there is a question here which will be posted online, and then I'll post it in the chat, and then I'll expect that you'll be able to type your response to it, either yes or no, and then hopefully the moderator will be helping us to tally that kind of something. So let me cut and paste that particular question, and then I'll put it in the chat. So, yeah. Then people are also welcome, as I talk on, you are also welcome to post your reflections as we go on, because all of these things will be picked up when we finish. And then we'll be able to discuss about some of these issues. So let me go back to my full screen. So now, what is the motivation for this topic? You may want to ask. You see, some of us will do research that break our hearts, okay? And if I use myself as an example, in 2002, I had, this research idea that I wanted to do because I moved to the UK in the 90s, and I wanted to find a sort of a research pathway that resonates with me. So, and because of the development in technology and people moving around, I thought diaspora media will become much more powerful. So I said I'll be looking into diaspora media and diaspora journalists within the UK context and looking at what they do, how people in the diaspora represent themselves. As far as I was concerned, it was just a mundane thing, you know, just report, meet with them and write my papers. But I didn't realize that I would be vulnerable to vicarious trauma as a result of that. And why did I say that? Because each time I go to some of these journalists, some of them have been to tough places. There are some journalists from, you know, Iraq war just ended then, you know, who have come to the UK. Then, of course, later on down the line, you have the Syrian journalists coming to the UK. Some journalists from Africa, all over the world who have been, you know, persecuted have come to the UK. So I was talking to some of them about their journalistic practice. That was the main thing that I was much more interested about. But sometimes they talk to me about their trauma. One example of that, which is closer to home for me, was when I was interviewing Kayode Soyinka. Kayode Soyinka was a correspondent for Newswatch, for those of us who know this history very well. And I was talking to him about his publication in the UK because he has Africa Today magazine in the UK. So we're talking about that. I was in his office in London, and he just stopped and looked at me and said, "What happened?" He said, "Did I know that he's deaf in one ear?" I said, "I didn't know." He said, "Okay." He said, "Do you remember the case of Dele Giwa in 1986? Then he started narrating what happened. He was actually in front of Dele Giwa, opposite him, when that bomb went off. And that, you know, it had a lot of problem for him. So he's now, you know, having that, you know, flashback, and then this being deaf in one ear. And that came out of the blue. You see the point? It wasn't something I have come to talk to him about, but it's something that, so we had to stop, because when you are interviewing people and things like that, and they show evidence of trauma or something like that, you don't just continue like that. You have to know how to empathize, how to relate to people and also. And at that point in time, I wasn't schooled in any way in trauma or trauma-related sort of thing like that. So I lacked the language and the genre to articulate exactly what is happening around me and relating to my work. So along the line, I got in touch with a professor in our School of Psychology, who is a professor of trauma. And I mentioned some of these things to him, and he said, "Ola, there's something in this, we need to explore." And it also occurred to me as a journalist, because I've been a journalist. I was a journalist for Guardian in Nigeria in the 80s, you know, photojournalist and a reporter. And I've been attacked before doing my work. But you just take it on board and just say, "Oh, well, it's part of the job," you know. So, and looking at that, I said, okay, we need to do something to prepare our students, because to me, it also became like, you know, a wake-up call that I've been teaching journalism students for many, many years without telling them about trauma and the exposure that exposure can have on their well-being. So that was what led to Journalism Education and Trauma Research Group that we set up. Now, moving on, what do we mean by research-related trauma? Because again, you have to reflect on what you do. Now, this is defined as vicarious trauma manifesting from an experience with harm, violence, or death. Okay, so many of us may say, okay, I'm not in contact with death or violence, but when you read about it and you constantly read about it, it can be problematic. So what do we mean by trauma in that sense? It's a Greek word for wound. So, and this wound is not a physical wound. It's a sort of wound that is emotional, internal. In fact, some of my colleagues in psychology, they are talking of moral injury as well, where you interview people, say people who are running away from, who are refugees, for instance. You can encounter from there and see that there is a lot of injustice that has led to that situation. Then you can have what we call moral injury, because you are looking at that at that injustice and you don't know what to do. You become perplexed. So But sometimes you can also be in harm's way. So that's why they talk about physiological trauma, where, you are there physically, and this thing is happening around you. So we need to have an understanding of what this means if we need to help ourselves and help our tutees. So in terms of RRT, which is research-related trauma, if I use that acronym so you know where it's coming from, RRT, there are two aspects to it. It's about when you study traumatizing or controversial content, okay? So again, using the example that my prof said earlier on, even going to the archive, or, interviewing people who are already traumatized can put you in that kind of situation. Or when you are harassed as a result of the work that you are doing, okay? So some topics that can make you vulnerable to vicarious trauma include studying something like war, terrorism, natural disaster, even sifting through newspapers about these things and doing content analysis or textual analysis can still be, traumatizing. Health communication, many people, they talk about, health communication. Look at, what happened with COVID-19. The effect of COVID-19 is still being felt, among journalists and those who are also reading about it. In the UK here, many Black people died of COVID-19 because they are frontline workers. They are the ones working in the hospitals, more of them working in the hospitals. They contracted it and died, you see? So definitely in reporting that or reading about that as a Black man yourself, you kind of, it brings it home to you. Financial crisis, domestic issues, violence, policies, whether it's in place or not in place and things like that, they can also be part of those things that can traumatize you. Harmful content online. We take this thing for granted because when you post your research or you are doing research on anti-Islam, you come across a lot of hate, speech, intolerance, discourse, unwanted explicit messages, especially if you are a lady, and a lot of research has been done and things like that, in other places, because research is still growing in this area, to be candid, So I've just been picking in a bit of those ones that are, very, very congent to us. Cyberbullying, they can make you as a scholar to actually become traumatized. And then if you don't have that supportive environment, and that's why I'm hammering on some of us who are supervising students who might be exposed to these sort of things, how do you support them? Don't just think that, they are left on their own, they can just manage and just get over it. When what was my time, I went through it and I was okay. Things are changing now, and we need to be able to know what to do to support them. Professor Olukwono, please mute yourself, maybe. I think the message is coming from you. Now, there are some symptoms that people are not quite aware of that could, be causing. There's a connection between what you are doing as a researcher and how you are feeling. So if you are feeling constantly in a state of fear, okay, or you are nervous or impatient, it could be linked to your research, okay? So, and because if you are not aware of this trauma issue, you may not link it. You may just think, oh, well, something's come over me, or like they say in other climb, it's a spiritual attack. It's not a spiritual attack, something that is related to what you are doing. Isolation, so you become very isolated because doing research is very isolating. Many PhD students find it very, very hard, because they are there alone doing all their work and things like that, and especially if they are also not doing it where their family is located. So when they travel abroad to do this, it can be very, very difficult on them. You can have intrusive thoughts or imagery, that can be very worrying as well, or you are worrying excessively. Sometimes there could be bystander guilt, and that is very common, especially when you go to IPD, internally displaced people's camp, and then you see what's happening to them and also things like that, and you report about it or research it, and you can have a guilt, bystander guilt, and that can express themselves in many ways. You can lose meaning about what to do. So what do I do? You become helpless. you know, you can have flashbacks, like I mentioned about this journalist who was speaking to me, panic attacks. So these are some of the symptoms, okay? You don't have to have all of them at the same time, you know, and as we'll be talking about resilience later, not everybody, you know, is, you know, vulnerable at the same rate, okay? It you know, it differs, you know, it's just exclusive to individual. You have to treat each person as individuals. So other stressors can also occur, especially for, you know, researchers who are teaching and at the same time doing research. The workload can be overwhelming, and that can cause you to have, you know, this kind of issues coming in your life, and then be exhibiting the symptoms that we mentioned earlier on. If you can't maintain work-life balance, it can be problematic, you know. If you are fearful for your job, like in the UK now, we have the universities in distress, you know, financial distress, you know, and I do feel for young, you know, academics, because you are just starting out your career and you are not quite sure that you can be in job for the next year or two, you know, that can be very disturbing. And you are also doing, you know, topics on traumatizing, something that can also, that combination can be very, very bad. And we have a publish or perish mentality, especially in the Western world, where if you really want to move forward, you have to publish all the time, you know, and that pressure to publish can also, you know, enhance these sort of problems that we're talking about. Supervisors too can put a lot of pressure on their students, because especially in the UK here, we want our students to finish on time. So if you come in as a full-time, you know, PhD student, we expect you to finish in 3 years, maximum 3.5 years. So that pressure on the students can also, if you are not, you know, trauma literate as a supervisor, you can really add more to the problem that they have. Where is that sound coming from? I'm thinking, if everybody should mute, please, so that we don't have this disturbing, you know, something like that. Now, when we are talking about emotion, because one of the effects of exposure to traumatizing topics is that it affects you emotionally. So what do we understand by emotion? Emotion, you know, regulates the way we think. So if the way you think is now being affected, you know, because some images are coming up, some memories are being recollected and things like that, then you have an issue. So I expect supervisors to also find a way to regulate their own emotion and the emotions of others. You can do it in 4 ways, in 5 ways that are specified. Modification of the situation. So you can ask the people to change their location, change your situation, okay, and make it happen. No, I'll give you an example of a journalist in, because there's a test case on this one in Australia. This journalist was reporting for a newspaper called Age, okay? And then she was working for them as a reporter, court reporter. So they will send her to the court, and she will report about different crimes, you know, sexual abuse, all sort of things like that. She did that for 10 years consecutively. And at one point, she felt the weight of it. So she went to the editor and said, look, I think, you know, I can't do this. And the editor said, okay, now go away for 2 months. So they changed their situation. So she went away for 2 months, came back, and she felt better. But after that, the editor thought, oh, well, I think I have to put you back on this beat because you are the best that we have to do this. So she did it again and did it for another 10 years. And what happened after that? She broke down completely, okay? And she couldn't do her job anymore. So she went to court and she won the case against, organization. She won $200,000 US dollars as a result of that. So there's a test case in this sort of thing that as editors, as supervisors, even as an institution, we have, you know, a duty of care, which you will see again as we discuss on in this sort of thing like that. So there are many ways in which we can regulate our emotions. Now, many of our students are doing things that actually we can regard as emotional labor. I know that, you know, in those days, you know, you can get your PhD students to do part of your research for you and say, okay, go and gather this thing for me, or they are also doing it themselves. So that's emotional labor involved in that. For instance, students can be labeling harmful content. So I say, okay, go and tabulate these sort of things for me. How many times did you find reference to pornography? Did you find reference to, stabbing or this sort of, then, they are doing content analysis or conducting analysis. They're also interviewing participants who have experienced trauma. All of these things are part of emotional labor that is involved in our work. And some of us who do research regularly, we know that we are invested in what we do. And that's why we are very attached to our work. When you send it for publication and it's rejected, you feel it. It's as if somebody has stabbed you. Well, I feel it that way, It's as if somebody has stabbed me, because you've put in so much effort into doing that kind of something, and somebody is just rubbishing it or something like that. Of course, they will make it in a very, civil way to tell you. So we need to promote emotional intelligence. Okay, what does that mean? The ability to recognize and effectively manage work-based emotion. That is what we mean by that. Now, there are some barriers to people asking for help. And this is what we need to look into here. So some of the barriers, like, researchers fear being, labeled troublemakers. So especially if they are young, ECR, we call early career researchers. You don't want to be seen as a troublemaker at such a, at the beginning of your own career. So you keep quiet and you take it on and on. But if we as supervisors are trauma literate, and that's one thing I want us to take away from this particular talk today, we need to be more trauma literate to be able to support our students. So lack awareness of signs of trauma. So if we lack that awareness, we may not be able to associate those two things, And then there is a need to integrate trauma-informed care system within the department. It has to become a culture where we provide a safe environment for people to talk and collaborate and things like that, as we shall also, explain later. So there are some approaches to coping strategies. And, in this one, we are using psychosocial approach. This mentions that people are different. You can't say one size fits all for everybody. So we just have to see, as people are showing the kind of something that they are showing, how are they going to cope? So it's important to recognize the need for a diversity of coping strategies. So there are many, many different ways in which people cope. So some of them we shall be seeing in a while. Now, this is the example that I don't want people to imitate, but people use them, as a coping strategy. But this is negative or maladaptive coping strategy. Desensitization means that you can become numb to people's feelings. So because you've been doing so much, especially, if you have been seeing, going to, like somebody said to me, one of my colleagues many years ago, is a historian. And what does she study? She actually goes to the cemetery. She studies cemetery. Basically, she goes there and look at, slabs and things like that and record things, So if you are doing that on a regular basis, you become numb to death and to all sorts of things like that. So it doesn't bother. So we need to be able to know what we need to do to be able to cope. Drugs, some people are taking drugs, alcohol, just to, they say, oh, well, it may start with, oh, I just use it to distress myself, and then it becomes a habit, okay? Then self-blame can also be an issue there that people should be aware of and things like that. So those ones are the ones that we don't want. So what we really want is for you to be trauma-aware and trauma-sensitive. And that's the starting point of some of this, of our debate today. You have to have cultural sensitivity. How do you demonstrate a sense of empathy? Because culture to culture, we differ in the way we relate to grief. So how people grieve in the UK is different from how people grieve in Nigeria. See the point? So you have to have that cultural sensitivity. Cultural competence, okay? So when you interview people in a way that leaves both you and them feeling valued, how do you relate to them in such a way that you don't make them feel worse than they were before you came to them? Then you have to avoid vicarious trauma. So by verifying information. So when people give you information, you can use other means to verify it, documentary evidence or corroborating witnesses to verify that information. There are other ways in which we can support our students, like making them to work in collaboration, you know, because as I said, research is in isolation so much, but we can say, okay, you can work together with some group of people and things like that, you know, to be able to do this. So JETREG, which is Journalism, Education and Trauma Research Group that I set up, we work in collaboration to do something. So you'll be able to share the burden and also things like that. You know, the institutional support should be in place. Training, which is lacking at the moment. You have to train people on how to use, you know, on such things as data and personal security, especially if you are working online and things like that. If you don't know about these things, then you could be, you know, a victim of some of these online attacks and things like that. Then peer or disciplinary associations, you know, they have to also find a way to support colleagues who might be vulnerable to vicarious trauma. Find time to relax is good. Physical exercise is good. Social support, so you have social support both at work and at home. Then mindfulness, and so some of us, you know, in other climes, you know, religion, it can be an issue which can help you to cope. So then there is also self-care, which is another important aspect which people should know, you know, that they have. So self-care is where you kind of, you know yourself and you know how to promote wellness, okay, and helping yourself in that sort of thing. So it's a multidimensional, you know, approach. You know, you can seek professional support through self-help, self-care, you know, engage in professional development as well. Taking breaks, you can do some activities, engaging in enjoyable activities. You can, you know, cooking, walking, watching movies, all sorts of that. It's part of the way in which to take your mind off your daily activities. So that's where that one is very important, self-help. So it's part of the way in which, if we are not careful, it can, you know, lead to burnout. And that was what happened with this Australian journalist. You know, she got burnt out, you know. So we have to enhance our well-being through, you know, self-care strategies. And then we have life satisfaction, you know, job satisfaction, and then you reduce personal impairment. Now, resilience is one thing that is very important for many of us who are exposed to traumatizing, you know, events or topics. So, but resilience again is something that, you know, it's not, you know, one size fits all sort of way of doing things, but it is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, okay? And how people adapt differs. If you look at people who are grieving, you may see somebody, okay, they've lost a child, and after a year, they kind of get over it and then move on. And some people, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, they are still grieving. So it varies, you know, and, you know, how we, you know, encounter these sort of things also has to put into perspective. So we'll look at some case studies. I'll bring maybe a couple of examples of research that's been done. But before we start that case study, there's another poll that I want us to complete. So I'm going to also post a question. This is the second question in the chat. And then again, it's a simple yes or no to this one, which will be tallied. So I'll post it in here. And then at the end of my talk, we'll be able to reflect on some of these things. So let me go back to my full screen. Good. Now, so some developing research has been going on. This one by Daly et al. Was to look at how COVID-19 affected mental health of university staff, which is quite interesting. And then they link it up to how it has influenced recruitment and retention efforts, okay? Now, we all agree that COVID-19 is very traumatizing, many people who have been affected by it actually will testify to that. So they surveyed 114 staff members in the School of Psychology training programs, okay? Some interesting that they found here is quite, elucidating. They said the higher your salary, the less likely you are to report psychopathology. So that means those people are already high up there. They kind of feel more satisfied and much more resilient than those who are just, climbing the scale. Then they also found that when you are just doing research, because in universities, we have people who are just on research contract only, okay? They are small in number, but we have them. Then we have people who are teaching and research contract, and we have people who are on just teaching contract, okay? So those are the three categories. So what you are saying here is that those who are on research contract only are more likely to experience positive mental health because they are not under too much pressure to do too many things, okay? So, and this is very helpful to know how to workload people's, work. So again, if you practice frequent self-care, you are more likely to experience positive mental health. So many people just don't have the staying power to practice self-care strategies, and they say this is very helpful. Then when it comes to retaining, and recruiting, academics, they found that many young graduates don't want to become academics, okay? Because they have a perception that it's a very stressful job, okay? And that our pressure to publish is also very, very, giving them a sort of a, panic. So they don't want to come into that kind of climate. So we need to be able to redress and change some of these things. So research on the mental health and well-being also show that they identify problems with emotional exhaustion. So people are emotionally exhausted. Component of burnout is also there. There's also negative job satisfaction and negative emotional experiences. So that is the picture from the academia that is imagined when they're now looking at the mental health of staff. So what sort of institutional support should we be looking at? Okay, so we have to be, because it's not just done at an individual level. So what we've been talking about is how supervisors can support their tutees and how, tutees too can gain from that kind of environment. But it has to also come from the top. So we're talking of ethical decision policy. This is very important because before you start your research, you are supposed to submit an ethics application. I have a PhD student who started 3 years ago. When they submitted their ethics application, it took 3 rounds. It was bounced back 3 times because there are some issues that, were not clear from that application that they wanted us to clarify. Because this person is studying refugees. And when you are studying refugees, definitely, and being a refugee themselves, they can re-traumatize themselves, so it has to be put in there. So policy has to be in place, peer discussion, then community forum to foster a sense of belonging has to be there, supervision to process their experiences, and then trauma-informed care system has to be enacted. And that is where I'm going with this, and what JETRED is trying to do is to come up with this, what we call trauma-informed care system, in a formalized way. Is there, in a scanty way in some places, but we really need to make it formalized across the board. So employers can include practices such as promoting healthy lifestyle. So in the UK here, if you will find they set up clubs, members can join, you can go to the gym, that's university gym and all sort of things like that. They kind of promote all sort of things like that. They also talk about work boundaries. They help you with that. So self-care strategies, setting appropriate professional personal boundaries, making many strategies which can promote scholarly work or can also be put in place, and then financial resources to attend professional conferences. Some students are, some of our tutors are struggling to find the money to go on conferences, and that can be very stressful as well. So the care system, is defined here as a systematic framework for moral and political thought. And Hansen and Lang in 2016 identified 3 areas where that care system should be. They're talking about workforce, so professional development should be there. Organizational changes, so within the department, we have to make some changes, and then practice, the way we actually do our work. You know, that care system should filter through all those 3 areas. So the last 2, slides of my something is just giving you an example of what the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services have done. They developed 6 core principles of trauma-informed care, which could be helpful for us in modifying to put in our department and in the way we do our things. They talk about safety. So we should talk about safety with our students, and for yourself, when you're going to do something like that, how do you protect yourself? Then trustworthiness and transparency has to be in place, because you're going to interview some people, they have to trust you, you have to be transparent about what you are doing. Peer support has to be in place. Collaboration and mutuality, so collaborate with other people has to be very encouraged. Empowerment, having a voice, having a safe space to speak has to be there. And then cultural and gender issues have to be considered. And then TICS, which is trauma-informed care system, should, have this sort of components. There should be an understanding of widespread impact of trauma, which is some of the things that we've been discussing since the beginning of this talk, that we need to have that understanding. What does it mean? What's trauma and how does it affect us? It also has to recognize signs and symptoms, which we also mentioned some of it here. Then fully integrate knowledge about trauma into procedures. So we have to put it into the way we do things within the department, within the university, and actively resist re-traumatization of those in the system. So that is kind of model that is out there that was done by SAMHSA. So we can use that and modify it for our own use. So if you are interested in this topic, of course, I'll have some reading materials there for you. And I'm happy for the coordinator organizers to send out these slides to whoever is interested. So if you're interested, you can drop your email in the chat and they'll send a copy to you. So we are now ended my brief discussion. So I'll expect the moderator to please give us the outcome of the result. So I'll end there. Thank you so much. And then we can. I'll quickly go to the small room. I'll join you in a sec. Yeah. So I hand over back to Professor Lupano, please, and Atta.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes. Is we had asked Mr. Noah to, is it Mr. Noah? To do the results for us. That's my understanding of it. Oh, okay. Professor Godwin Sogolo, I can see your hand.
Yes. Oh, is the speaker back? I thought he said he was there. We should give him some time.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right.
He's concluded his presentation, sir.
Pardon?
The presentation is completed, sir. So I think it's time
it's
for
finished. Yes.
to take. Yes, it's finished.
I think he said he was going to the bathroom.
He said he was going to. Yes, I would. Yes. Yeah.
Oh,
we should give him some time.
Okay, we should. Yes, let's do that.
Put it up now.
I was asking that the outcome of the collated results. Do we have the results?
Okay, sir. I'm collating it, sir.
Okay.
I'm collating it. Yes.
All right. So when he comes back, we will move to the next section, which will be questions and answers. This has been a fascinating conversation. It's a lot in there. And I will not attempt to do any summary of what he has given. Otherwise, I'm going to be giving another lecture, which is not necessary. So let's wait for him to come back, and then we begin to raise questions and maybe respond to some of them too.
This one, two.
Chairs, Professor Lukwano.
Yes,
We
Mr.
just want
President.
to
I know you also would like to say some few words. Maybe this is the time to do that.
No, it's just to let the participants know that the slides are already in the chat room. So you can download it straight from the chat room. Now it's available in the chat
let
room.
me, all right, let me do that.
No, it's already there. I already posted it there. I already posted it in the chat room.
Okay. Very good. Let me go to the chat room and all right.
I can see some people raising up their hands.
Yeah,
we can pick on some of them.
He's back now, so.
Yeah, okay. I think we should go to questions and answers, if you don't mind. So is Professor Sogolo, we would like to begin? I saw your hand.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Thank you. This is a very captivating, very interesting topic, in fact. And I followed through the discussion. Incidentally, Professor Ogunyemi was at the Guardian in Lagos when I was also on the editorial board at that time. I don't know whether he remembers that. That was between the 60s, 1986 to early 1991. And,
you are right. Yes. Oh, God. It's a small...
You remember?
I remember you now.
Yes.
Oh,
So thank you very much. I didn't know you have become a professor. The young shall grow. So you see, the very interesting thing I find was that you talk about trauma, and then I thought when you started that it was going to be something that people of a particular discipline, journalism, for instance, encounter. But as you went on, I then found that it was something that in fact involves all of us. And when you talk about the kind of experience you go through when you have encounters with your supervisor, when I was in Wales in the UK, there were times where you have a meeting with your supervisor and you just feel that the end has come. And you almost want to give up your research. And then you have another meeting. You then get again that things have become better. So you are hopeful. Now, the problem that arises from this is this. How do you define trauma? Is it every worry that is a trauma? Because for many people, you have them on and off. You see, I didn't quite get that part. When would you say this experience is a trauma? Because you worry today as a researcher, and then day after that, you're all right, and then you worry again on and off. The degree of worry can be very severe, but then it comes on and off. So when do you refer to it as trauma? That is my only question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Chairperson, do you want us to take a few questions you want me to answer immediately? You are muted, Chair.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. I think we'll prefer to take 2-3 questions and then ask the presenter to respond to them. So that's the first question coming from Professor Sogolo. Let me call on my sister, Professor Ajayi Soyinka to ask the second question or comment.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Yes, like Professor Sogolo said, it expanded beyond journalism and it covers all of us, but there are also some cumulative incidences or experiences that together become trauma. However, we dismiss this. As each one comes, we say, oh, we either blame ourselves, like you pointed out, and dismiss, and then whatever, especially in the diaspora. As I met with a student yesterday, an African student from Uganda, and she was just, from my former department, because I'm retired, but she just, she was at first just complaining. I mean, not complaining negatively, but just telling of her experiences that she doesn't have faculty or supervisors who understand her problems. She has money issues, scholarship was not coming. But at the end, so I said, okay, so how can I'd like to help. Can you direct me exactly? She said, it's just to talk to you. Just to talk to you has lifted a huge load off her mind. And that's one. But this is, I think, I'm not very familiar with this area, but I think it's a new area. You are from the UK. Are there institutions that have set in motion, or as an institution, the establishment of taking care of faculty student trauma, doing research, just generally, not specific, like reporting from the war front or disaster area or things like that? Is that spreading? Is it something that academics can look forward to without being blamed for being lazy and so on? Call to mind the veterinarians here, veterans, soldiers in the US who are just being recognized for the trauma they got through during the war. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I will take just one more. Lina.
Thank you, sir. I want to apologize for coming late. I made part of the trauma research group in South America, and I want to ask to Ola Professor about the systematization of the results of the research. If you have results in this moment, or are you projecting this for the future? Could you understand me?
Yeah, I got you, Lina.
I'm not sure.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
You want to? Would you like to repeat that?
I understand, Prof.
Oh, you got it.
I understand, Lina.
Oh,
Lina,
okay, that's fine.
Yes, Lina is
Okay.
one of the members of my research group, Journalism, Education,
okay.
and Trauma Research Group. She's based in Brazil.
Okay.
No, I am not based in Brazil. I am based on Colombia. South
Colombia,
America.
yes, sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to say
Okay.
she's in Colombia. So we have a research group in...
So you can, you may respond to the three questions.
Yes,
Yeah,
I will
go
respond to
ahead,
it. Yes.
please.
Now, how do you know you are traumatized? You see, that's why we said it's a wound that is internal, okay? Now, you will know when you kind of behaving in a particular way, or once your mood, begins to change, you will kind of realize that something is wrong with you. But you may not be able to pinpoint it. And that's why I'm talking about we need to begin to make a connection between what we do and how we feel. Are you getting me? Because most of the time we separate the two things and you just say, oh, well, because, okay, take for instance, many journalists who have been traumatized, okay, they've lost, they've become divorced, they've lost contact with their families and things. Why? Because they just cannot relate what they are going through at work at home. And then at home, people feel then that they are becoming so distant, and then they are not their usual self again, and this and then of course it causes friction, and then begin to blame themselves, and then they separate. So that has been the issue. So when you now see mood change, we are not saying that it's equal with everybody, it differs. But when you see that you are constantly having this kind of issue, if you are not an angry person before, and you are constantly snapping, a little thing you snap, and people say to you, why are you always snapping? Then you need to be able to call back yourself and say, am I, so look at the symptoms and say, so it's not all the time that you have to go to a clinician. It's only when it becomes extreme, then you may have to go to clinician. Just like, Professor Ajayi said earlier, talking to somebody. So you have a sympathetic head of school or colleagues and things like that, they can help you. That can help because you have unburdened yourself. Something like that. So yes, it's very difficult to say this is one singular thing that you need to look for to say you are traumatized, okay? So, and that's where this sort of thing, we have to wait according to the person and the need. Now, in terms of the institutions, whether many institutions are already putting measures in place, well, I will say to you that it's very haphazard. I think there is a realization now, because as a result of my own work too, universities are beginning to embed trauma-informed literacy in the curricula. So in journalism school now, across the UK and across the world, and Lina is part of my group in South America, they are now beginning to look at how to teach trauma to students. You see, so you don't have to be a psychology student now to be able to learn about trauma and the effects of trauma on you, because of the kind of work that you do. So there is going to be what we call, a duty of care on behalf of universities. And if, somebody can take their employer to court for not having that duty of care in place, then universities could become vulnerable in future, that students can actually take us to court for not telling them about the dangers that they're going to face. Because to me, I look at my students, it's just like saying to them, oh, if you use the analogy of a soldier, you train a soldier, then after they graduate, you give them the gun, give them a hat, and don't give them bulletproof, and say, go to the war front and then you'll be fine. Just shoot and you'll be fine. So we are under preparing them for the kind of danger that they're going to face. So that's why this sort of discussion is very, very important. It's a new area. So there's not a lot of literature in that field. And for us in JETREC, Journalism, Education and Trauma Research, we are building up, our capacity in this area, and then to be able to use in our work. I will post our website for you so that you can see some of the materials that we are using, which can be very helpful to some of you, and see there is a lot of podcasts that is available as well, so which is developing. So yeah, that's a growing area for us. So then the last question is that it's a future thing that Lina said. This is something that is still developing anyway, and it's still going to be developing for a long time to come. So that's it. Any other person? Posted the
yes.
link. I've posted the link to our website. Yes.
All right. Shall I call on Professor Albert?
Please.
Next, Professor
Thank
Albert.
Thank you so much, Sas. My work, basically is around traumatic situations. I study war situations, violent extremisms, and I get inserted in war environment. And I see different dimensions of what you are saying. But your treatment of this topic is very broad. And thank you so much for it, that you are serving us this menu in January. I think it's like helping us to redefine our scholarship. Now, trauma to us in war studies has to do with worries that are beyond our coping capacity. A normal person, if you are still normal, you should get worried on a daily basis. Because when you get worried, you are helped to move from one stage of development to the other. That you're a professor today is because you were worried at the time about whatever. But our worriness gets to a stage that they become either too good or too bad. So in war studies, we have positive trauma, we have positive trauma, we have negative trauma. But what I call positive trauma is not something too good. Now, the negative trauma has to do with, one, when your student is no longer able to cope. When you, as a professor or a teacher, you are no longer able to cope, the environment is too stressful. You have not been able to pay the school fees of your children, and you are asked to mark 1,000 scripts, and you begin to misbehave. You get easily, agitated. Students come to you, you send them out of your office, and so on. Now, these are different levels of a traumatic experience, but we have the so-called positive ones. A student gets, decides to leave the classroom to become a born-again Christian. You see him praying and crying, and when you move closer to him, he's crying for Nigeria. But the parents sent him to school to go and study physics. So it's difficult sometimes to separate between the positive and the negative. But we have a scale. We have scales 1 to 9 to measure the level of trauma. Now, my first research in Great Lake region, when we had the crisis in Rwanda and Burundi, we got to some IDP camps in Tanzania where people could no longer remember their names. You want to interview the person about the conditions, and you say, what is your name? The person had forgotten his name or her name. And I think the general one that all of us will experience at the time, whether we like it or not, as we grow older, we begin to forget certain things. And so trauma, we experience trauma on a daily basis. But there are moments where our body is no longer able to cope, and therefore we are not able to remember things as we normally do. Now, I work with a group in the United Kingdom recently, and the name of that group is social science. Sorry, I wrote the name here, but the group is actually dealing with some of the things that you have presented to us, but they are working in war environment. Yes, the name is social science in humanitarian action. I will look for the contact address, but they are more focused on traumatic, war-related traumatic situations. And we have just done a paper, which I will send to you, on trauma in some of the IDP camps that we have in northern Nigeria. And I agree with you. Some of the things you are saying can be taken to the war environment. If you are repeatedly abused, you are repeatedly sexually violated, children killed, wife killed, and you are asked to go home. So you realize that you are returning home to nothing. And, the trauma now gets to some levels where when you are encountered by anybody, it is assumed that you're a mad person. You are not mad. Your coping capacity has just been exceeded. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much. We'll take Cornelius Ishaya.
All right. Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Kwede Cornelius Ishaya. And honestly, the lecture is quite an exposition for me because I'm currently in the field, or I would say that I've just left the field. And my encounter in the field with the participants of my study actually left me in great shock. I was not prepared for what I encountered. The narrative out there was different, but what I saw in the field left me with a big shock that for 4 months I abandoned the research. But after a while, I had to pick up. So my concern is, how do we report the outcome of a research, considering the fact that there will be end users? Do we report them in their raw form or give a little tweak at the end of the day so that the consumers at the end of the day don't become traumatized to what we have encountered? Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I think I'll suggest that we ask Professor Ogunyemi to respond to 2 questions.
Good. Thank you so much. And thank you, Professor Albert, for sharing your experience with us on this issue. As I said to you, this is something that we should be discussing more as academics. I think sometimes we just think, oh, it comes with the job, just get on and do it, So, and I'm so happy that, we are discussing it here now, and the message is also flying about, and people are coming out, because again, in the past, if we were talking like 30 years ago, when I came into academia, nobody would even mention this sort of thing in front of you, because they just, what's wrong with you? So, but now, there's much more openness, and we need to create a safe space to be able to discuss this within the department. My message is actually going to the department, the head of department, and should create an enabling environment where people feel safe to talk about their experience. So like Cornelius just mentioned now, he came back from the field and he felt isolated. That's it feels to me. To abandon the work for 4 months, that losing 4 months of your research period is quite something. In fact, sometimes you may not even be able to pick it up again because you've been, you've been completely, disconnected with what you are doing. So how do you now report it? This is quite an interesting question, because some of the things that we teach our journalism students, there are 3 areas. First, you can become traumatized yourself because you are interviewing people who are traumatized. Okay, so that's why we call it vicarious or secondary trauma. Then you can re-traumatize the victims because you are asking them, like Professor Albert was saying that, oh, what's your name? Even in the process of asking them something like that, they are recollecting the trauma. It's the point. So you can re-traumatize them if you are not sensitive. You are not trained in trauma, sensitive interviews. You can re-traumatize them. Then you can also traumatize your audience, your readers. So these 3 areas are what we teach journalism students now to be aware of. So there are certain things. So for instance, in the UK, for a long time, even before they start talking about trauma in the field, for a long time, when you are reporting suicide, you don't even explain explicitly how that person committed suicide, because they don't want you to traumatize the audience about it, So when you are now picking out information from your work, make sure that there are certain things that you don't explain in details. You can mention that thing happened, but don't go into nitty-gritty and say, this is what I'm doing. So that's one way to do it. It means that you are saying less than you know for the sake of the audience, for their sanity. And that's why you also need support. I don't know whether in your institution, whether you have the support. That's why we are talking about, do you have the support and the training? And were you actually, prepared? Were you equipped before you even went to the field? You see the point? Because you said you were shocked when you got to, because the narrative before going to the field was a different thing. And you got there and then you made something, of course, always gruesome when you go to the field to do work. So you need that support before going so that you know what to make. And when you come back, you need to be debriefed. So there needs to be an environment where you can talk about it. So if they have picked it up immediately you came back, you wouldn't have wasted 4 months trying to overcome the emotion and all sort of things like that, and to come back to what you are doing. So yeah, that's what I would advise at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. We have Femi Otubanjo, and then we will call on the president, and then I'll give final remarks. So shall I ask Femi Otubanjo to speak?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm not a member, I'm not a fellow, I'm just a guest of the Academy of Letters. I'm so glad to listen to Professor Ogunyemi. This topic, from the Nigerian standpoint, is bigger and more profound than one could ever imagine. It's valuable, really, that you are presenting it before the Academy of Letters. They need to know, because it's an influential group. In Nigeria, there's no awareness of trauma among students. There's no awareness, not to talk of provisions for it. Our PhD students go through torture. Nigerian research is a torture chamber. We do not assume, we do not even take it for granted that students have emotions. They can travel for hours and hundreds of kilometers to a lecturer who is hostile to them. We have a paternalistic environment in which students are nothing. And so the attrition rate among PhD must be very high. Nobody has studied it. But you find that even some people are not afraid to go and see their lecturers. This is a trauma-producing environment. And so we need to do something about it. We assume that our students are tough. A lot of them, our students have come to me crying because they have just rejected their proposal. They have just damaged their field research. So the Academy of Science, this is a great stimulation for the Academy of Science to work out a program how to deal with trauma. Academy of Letters, sorry.
Yes, sir.
To deal with trauma. Trauma is inbuilt into our system and we do nothing about it. We know nothing about it. So I'm so grateful that you are brought it to our attention. Our lecturers are torturers, our PhD supervisors. That's the environment. It's a paternalistic environment, and they think that students can take anything, throw them out of your office, write all kinds of things about you, don't know the consequences of what they're going. Some of them are young mothers, some of them are young wives who are just coping with trauma of marriage, with the challenges of childbearing. And then to come to do PhD, you just destroy their motivation. So I'm so grateful to you that you have brought this to our notice. It's new to me. It's something that I think we ought to take more seriously. And the Academy of Letters to adopt it as one of their programs. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the comment. I think it's proper to allow the president to maybe have the last say before we call on this presenter to also respond. But then I see another hand, I think Tony Afejuku. Would you like to make it pretty brief? And then I call on Zakuna. Yes, please.
There is also Cornelius Ishaya Akwede, whose hand is also up. So we wish to take the two, yeah. And mine is not the final words, it's just another question.
It's another question, all right. So why don't we have two questions, we have two already, right? So let us have Tony Afejuku's question, and then we'll call on Professor Ogunyemi to respond. Tony.
Yes, two questions. One, I think it was
Professor Albert, who said something to the effect that there's positive trauma. When he spoke, I wanted to know how trauma can be positive. He can bail me out, or the lecturer can take over. And secondly, the last speaker, I think Femi Otubanjo, was heaping blames on lecturers, professors, that our students are being traumatized. If the work is not right, the lecturer says so that it is right, but more importantly, lecturers are being traumatized by the government, poor pay, poor salaries, poor working environment. Nobody has mentioned that. I came late. Why is it that we're heaping blames on lecturers, professors? It's not fair. Please, I think we should do a kind of a rethink. Lecturers, professors, university workers are being traumatized far more than the students. Thank you. I'm done.
Okay, thank you very thank you very much. Professor Ogunyemi, please.
I thought
Okay, can I just ask my question, sir?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. Go ahead.
Okay. I'd like to take off from where Professor Tubanjo stopped. I mean, when he was talking about the way our research students are traumatized. I don't know whether your research, Professor Ogunyemi, has considered the experiences of not just postgraduate research students, but also even undergraduates. But for research at the postgraduate level, I remember that as a graduate student at the LSE in the 80s, the research completion rate by Africans was higher than that of the Europeans in the university. While the Britons, the other Europeans, had a completion of about 23, 24%, most Africans who were there were in the 50s and 60%, right? Yeah. So the question I was even wondering is, how much of this is due to trauma? How much is due to experiences that cannot be written down as excuse for not completing before your sponsors? And then I also noted that, and you are working in the UK system, so you know that the completion rate of your PhD student is part of the rating for the institutions. Mm-hmm. So I don't know whether they've made provision for addressing the issue at that level at which they recognize that some of the experiences of the research students is not due to the failure of the system, but the experiences they themselves were going through. I don't know. The second question I was going to ask is, I was reading something yesterday about the response of husbands and wives to grief, to the loss of a child. That while the husband appears to have quickly gotten over it, that actually in the long term, the husband suffers more trauma than the wife. But the bravado that we see makes us think that the man has gotten over it quickly or faster than the wife. The question I was going to ask is there gender differentiation in responding to similar traumatic experiences or similar situation in the course of your research? Is there any kind of differentiation in the response of men or women or binary, whichever one you want to call it, the current language of the world, the one that God did not create? So is there gender differentiation in responses to similar situations? These are just some of my things I was replying to, based on what I was just reading just 2-3 days ago about how do we respond to the trauma of parents losing a child. Just that's sorry to have added to your question. So
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting. Now, let me come with a caveat first. I'm not an expert on trauma. I stumbled on trauma as a result of my own research into diaspora journalists and things like that. And I had to now collaborate with experts on trauma to be able to do the work going forward. Okay, so we have a multidisciplinary research group, which brings in people from different, disciplines into that. So the priority of my research is to equip journalism students with the skills to actually deal with the effects of exposure to trauma. Okay, so, but of course, looking at that, it also dawned on me quickly that if we are asking educators to teach trauma to students, they can also become traumatized as a result of that, because you're going to be sifting through materials to be able to teach other people. It's just like looking at social media and seeing all sort of, traumatizing something in it and then sifting out what you need to use from it. So that has brought us to the issue of how do we provide an enabling environment where people become comfortable to talk about whatever they are going through. And that's where we're talking about this care system, trauma-informed care system. So now, what they need to do is to put that in place. So what, Professor Otubanjo said, and what Cornelius also mentioned about, is because there is a lack of care system, trauma-informed care system in the institution, in the environment where they are doing their work. So once we begin to have that kind of conversation, and it will be different from place to place. You see, I gave the example of SAMHSA in America, the sort of care system that they're talking about. So we can modify that and look at our own environment, because some environments are more challenging than others. So researching in Nigeria can be more challenging than researching in the UK. So you need to know exactly how to get into that. So why are people not completing, as they should be? Of course, it's about motivation. It's down to motivation. You see the point. Home students, they don't see education as a passport to, employment or to prosperity. Whereas some of us have come from where we've come from, that's your gateway. Without that education, you are nowhere. You see the point? So you are more motivated, even if you don't want to be motivated, you'll be motivated to get it. And your parents are on your neck that you must finish and get this certificate. I remember when I got a scholarship to do my PhD, I went to tell my dad, I said, I got a scholarship to do PhD, and said, oh, should I do it? Because I was close to 30 then. The first question my mom asked was that, is it going to stop you from getting married? That was what she was concerned about. I said, no, it's not going to stop me. I said, okay. Then my dad said, okay, I just want to see that certificate. And that's it. Simple. So that's what they prioritize, and you want to do that. So yes, so that's the differences in that. In terms of gender difference, I cannot tell you about that aspect. I will have to table it with psychologists who are into that area of trauma and things like that, and to see whether. But I came across a research which I didn't mention in something here, looking at Morocco, how academic staff, female academic staffs, are being discriminated against, and being traumatized in the workplace. So they are not actually getting up the ladder. There are fewer of them who are professors, and then when they do research, their research is not, kind of this looked down on and things like that. So they go through all sort of issues, looking at that. I'm sure a similar study should be done in Nigeria, if it's not there being looked into, to look at how female academics are actually faring, and where these sort of issues are coming into place. So that's the little thing I can say about that for now. But as I said, this is a developing area. this is not going to be the end of this discussion. Maybe next year we may also be discussing another aspect of it, you know. So, but watch this space. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have Ebunoluwa Oluwole.
Oduwole, sir.
I'm sorry, Oduwole. Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Actually, I want to make a contribution and also a comment and contributions too. And it's also in form of a question. And the question is, how do we ensure that the researcher does not become the researched by being emotionally attached to the research or the research participants who are traumatized? For example, if a researcher who has experienced domestic violence now goes to the field and is asking questions, working on something on domestic violence, and in asking that questions, he or she breaks down, remembering those days when he or she was traumatized. So how do we ensure in research that the researcher does not become so emotionally attached to the participants to also break down or become emotionally, to the extent that it will affect the research? That's number one. Number two is an experience I want to share, and it has to do with our graduate, postgraduate students. Most of the time when we ask them to come and do a defense, or either their proposal, particularly their proposal or the project, we tend to forget that our duty is to mentor them and to put them right, rather than to judge and to condemn. I was in a university, which is not my own university, and I was opportune to be a part of the departmental board looking at the post field of the students. And this lady came, actually, I was actually observing as a new person there. I was trying to observe, and the way the lecturers were condemning the students, their projects, one particular lady went out and started crying. I didn't know the effect was so much on that lady that we now had a program in the department after the students had already finished the project, after all the students had already finished their projects. And this lady was one of those that came forward to share her experience. And then she linked that experience, the trauma which she experienced during the defense of the field work. So she now started to catalog the trauma of her life, how she has not been able to make it in life, how she has seen herself as a failure, how she did not gain admission on time, how she now found herself in that department, and how that led to, so a situation in which we are expected to be a mentor, a situation in which we're expected to put the student on the right path, now turned out to be one of the ways in which the student saw herself as being a victim of trauma all her life. So what can we do as members of the Academy of Letters to ensure that we don't pull our students down, we encourage them, we mentor them? For some of us that mentor students outside of Nigeria, we know that we cannot do this to our students. I mean, it's a form of harassment, and it is not always taken lightly. But in Nigeria here, it becomes a form of harassment, it becomes a form of bully, and then nobody is responsible for it. Those are my contributions.
Yes, thank you very much. Professor Ogunyemi, I suggest that I should add my own comments,
Please.
and then we'll give you the chance to respond. My impression was that the president wanted to say something, not just a question, based on what I heard at the beginning. But since it's a different take, so let me raise 2 or 3 questions with you, which you may or may not respond to. Then you have the chance to give us your closing remarks. This has been a very, very interesting and fascinating topic, which I have really enjoyed. And thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. The first thing I'd like to raise is to underscore the comments that have come from 2 of the participants who focused on students' matters and students' affairs. We cannot continue to pretend that all is well in the universities. That doesn't conflict with the response from one of the fellows that the faculties themselves, are traumatized based on, what the government is doing. But we know fully well that these questions of student supervision, students spending years and years and years to finish their MA, PhD, is something that we have to deal with. It is real. Don't let us, pretend that it is not correct. And it is also the case, as we have mentioned, that at times it borders on, what we don't often want to admit, and that is harassment. I think I would like to just lay it out. You may not, respond to it. The second comment that I'm interested in, laying out is that most of you know that I went to University of Nigeria, Nsukka. I went in 1971 after the Civil War. And some of the folks I were encountered were those who just came back from the war and who were, readmitted to the universities. They were older than us, and we saw this crisis, these problems there. And I believe that Nigerians' inability to deal with the trauma of the Civil War is partly responsible for the mess we are facing now, particularly from that part of the country. Nigeria called on some of the best physicists and engineers who took part in the Civil War to come to University of Nigeria, Nsukka. They enlisted them in the Department of Physics. Physics department faced my hall, Awolowo Hall, and promising that they're going to set them up to begin to think about a kind of a technological advancement for Nigeria. They wasted them. Nothing happened. They all retired and left. So that takes me to my third point. And that is that as a nation, we are probably suffering from a kind of a national, collective national trauma, which we dodge, which we do not want to talk about. And this is part of our crisis. And instead of us to face it as a nation, we began to blame the North and the South and the Igbos and Yorubas and so on. So as a way of responding to a trauma that it has not given us peace and will not give us peace until we decide to live with that. And finally, I would like to suggest that particularly for members of the diaspora, that quite often when these very important topics are discussed and we look at it from the framework of what is happening in America and in our own places where institutions are already established to deal with all these kinds of stuff. It's not so in Nigeria. And we are dealing with 2 different kinds of cultural, social, environment, and the two may not go together. So it will be important for us at times to highlight this and to make sure that we are pretty specific about, our references. But Professor Ogunyemi, you have touched a very, very important topic, and I can tell you that this is going to be the beginning of new lines and new forms of research. And I hope that when our fellows, particularly our junior fellows, approach you to, lead them to finding, new ways of responding to this, you will be willing to do that. As a student, I was trained, in Nigeria at a time when our senior scholars were fond of writing quarterly papers on emerging themes in this and that, in history, in religion. And those things became, those papers became very important for us for thinking about our work, our research work, and a number of people borrowed from it to formulate their questions and so. What we are seeing in Nigerian universities today is very sad and unfortunate, where people are repeating old research and old topics, and whereas some of these very fascinating things that are coming, are left out. So we must congratulate ourselves as members of the Nigerian Academy of Letters for, in fact, supporting these seminars. And because it is going to lead to new things and new findings and new ways of rethinking our role in the academy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
So I'll give you the time to respond.
Yeah,
Professor.
thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Olupon. That's you've actually summarized a lot of things and then relating it back to what is happening in Nigeria and Africa as a whole. This is a developing area, and we may have an excuse for not having institutional measures in place. But what we shouldn't have an excuse for is lack of awareness. Okay, and that's the purpose of this particular discussion that I have brought it to this place as well, this forum, is that we need to raise our level of awareness about traumatizing topics and their effects. Okay, so once we have that, then we begin to now fashion out the kind of coping mechanism that we think, we work in our own climate. You see, somebody raised a question earlier on, was asking Professor Alba whether there is something called positive trauma. There's nothing like positive trauma. It's, is what we call coping strategy. There is positive coping strategies. Okay, so that's what you can have in there. The trauma is trauma. It's always, something like that will affect anybody at any point in time. So in terms of what Eboluwa said, in terms of people who are already traumatized and then finding out, you see, we did it's an important area because in 2018, did a research with my students here, with, of course, in collaboration with my colleague who is in psychology. And at that point in time, I wanted to find out whether the teaching materials that we are using in classroom are traumatizing our students. Okay. So, and we did that, study. We did a survey of all the three arms. This is undergraduate because the president was also asking me whether we've done something on undergraduate students. Yes. So we looked at undergraduate students and said, what are those things? They should identify some of the teaching materials and how they are affecting them and to what level. Now, importantly, over 50% of them said they were not affected at all. However, 2% declared severe effect. So severe that it became a clinical issue. But because it was an anonymous survey, we could not pinpoint those students. So what we needed to do was to put an announcement to all the students and say, if you are in that category, go to the well-being center. Are you getting it? So we have people do come in. Another thing that we couldn't get from that survey was that did they come into the university with a pre-existing problem? You know, in nowadays in universities, when you want to enter, students are given the liberty to declare their existence. So we now have more students who are declaring mental health problems now, because in the past 6-7 years, we've been encouraging them, and then we're going to give them support to cope with that. You know, that support may even include extensions. There was a time one of my MA students was supposed to come and give, you know, a presentation in class for the final, you know, assignment. Refused to come for that presentation. And then when we challenged the person, they wrote back to the university to say that they have changed their sex. So they were male when they came in, and they've now trans to becoming female. And as a result of that, they became fearful to come into the classroom to give a presentation to other students. And for me to do. So I had to devise another means of presentation for them, because the university said, well, you have to take that into consideration. So again, you have to come up with something that works in your area and things like that. Yes, universities in the West are becoming more attuned to that, and they are responding to it, you know. So what we need in Global South is for that kind of response. And it's a learning curve too. So you begin to now, you know, so at least the debate is starting now, thankfully. We can begin to continue that debate and see how this thing can be going on and on. Yes, so there is also issue to do with technology facilitated GBH, gender-based violence. So some of us who are doing, you know, online studies and things like that, technology can actually, you know, enhance this kind of trauma that you can face. So it's not just when you meet them face to face that you find this sort of thing, that you can also get it through the technology. So there's a group, a research group on that, TFGBH. Those of you who might be interested in it, you can check it out. Technology facilitated gender-based violence. So Eboluwa may be interested in looking up into that as well. So yes, it's something that we cannot exhaust in one evening. So, but it's good that we are starting the debate now. We can have a workshop later on down in middle of the year or towards the end of the year, just to come and discuss. It won't be a lecture sort of forum, but to discuss, share, because you have to have a community of practice around this issue to be discussing it and then taking things forward and things like that. That's one thing I want to see, that community of practice. So if NAL will go behind that, we can have that community of practice, making this sort of thing like a workshop on this so that people can, you know, talk about their experiences and how they are managing issues and things like that. And then, of course, as more research is coming into place, we can now encourage institutions to have trauma-informed care system in place to help that happen. In my university here, I'm putting up a course, a short course on trauma-informed care system for managers, so that managers are more aware of this sort of thing, because they are going to do the enabling environment in this kind of area. So I would like to stop there because, you know, as I said, this is not something we can exhaust in one evening. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think we spent a lot of minutes on this. I do see Asmao Seger. I am tempted to close it, but at the same time, I want to be pretty fair to you. You may ask the question, and let's see if Professor Ogunyemi will still be able to answer it. But that's going to be the last question, if you don't mind. Seger, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for giving me the opportunity.
Is she or... Okay.
Yes, it's she. Can you hear me, sir?
Can you put on your video?
Okay.
Yeah,
My question is just a simple one, sir. Please, I just want to know when next, if you're organizing this kind of webinar, how would we be able to know? Thank you.
Well, that would be a question for the organizers. Professor Albert?
Yes, sir. Well, I think what we'll do is to send the calendar for this year to all of us, those of us who are part of this discussion. So we will get our calendar across to you. For example, the next presentation, the next seminar is coming up on January 30th, and we will send the invitation to you personally. Thank you so much, Asmael.
Yeah. So thank you. I think that...
Okay, Professor, are you handing over to us, sir?
Yes, that's what I want to do. I want to hand over to you. I thank you for
okay, sir.
inviting me. Yeah, so I think I've done my work, right? Thank you.
Okay, sir.
Go
our
ahead.
leader, our president, will still, give the closing remark, even if just to say thank you to all of us. But I want to start by thanking Professor Lupana for handling this meeting so scientifically. We enjoyed your leadership. And Professor Ogunyemi, you have served us a very sumptuous meal. And thank you for suggesting to us that probably we need to have a workshop on this. It could be a roundtable, because it is not a topic that anybody can just exhaust in one clean sweep. So we will come back to it later. There was a question as to whether there is a positive or negative trauma. I would want us to take that later. Professor Lupana is a global leader in religious studies. And in trauma counseling, we are told not to further aggravate the situation. And therefore, if a traumatized person becomes more religious, to us in social science analysis, we think it is something positive, because the person could go the other way. But I think we have to avoid annoying Professor Lupana based on my encounter with Father Kuka. We had a debate in Abuja here, and at a stage he stopped me. He said, Professor Albert, don't drag me into an eschatological debate. So I don't want to drag Professor Lupana into any eschatological debate. But to us, we feel that if the traumatized person is becoming more religious, that probably something good will come out from it. I agree with you, it could be a coping strategy, but we have a concept of post-traumatic stress disorder. So you can be traumatized and yet you have not reached the stage where the situation is beyond control. So thank you so much. We welcome your suggestion that we should have a workshop on this issue. I also want to thank Professor Shola Akiniade. You see, when you come to the stadium and you see people playing, you say, oh, these are good players. But some people organize them. So Professor Akiniade, sir, we salute your leadership. I must especially thank Professor Femi Otubanjo. Actually, he came up with issues that I think we need to revisit. How we treat our students. But Professor Olupana also helped us to adjust it further. The students are traumatized, but we the supervisors are equally traumatized. So here we'll be discussing displaced aggression. And I think that should be taken when we are having our workshop. Last but not the least, I want to thank Professor Atta, who is the secretary to this subcommittee. He did an excellent work. By the time we meet on monthly basis, of course, you will see all that he contributed to this process. So my leader, sir, Professor Akiniade, we invite you. Say thank you, I think, may be enough, but you have to say something before we close this session today.
Thank you, Professor Albert, and let me appreciate you for the excellent work of coordinating this program. When Tayo was exiting, you know, the trauma we had in trying to determine who was going to take over the coordination, and Tayo also showed that you are going to do an excellent job, and you have proven him right. So I really thank you first. Now, when we started this session, Professor Lupono was wondering why everybody was thanking him. After all, he's a member of the academy. Yes, sir, you're a member of the academy. In fact, you are one of our esteemed fellows. But we have so many of our fellows who don't even show up at our programs, despite being around, despite being close to the venue, despite some of them being online. And when we celebrate you, it's because we know that you are continuing to connect with every generation of scholars, and you are continuing to mentor our scholars. And by the way, the next edition of Africa that is coming out, part of the bit I did for the journal has something on the IIAS, so don't be surprised when the journal comes out, because it's one of your contributions to developing the next generation of scholars. So we celebrate you, and we celebrate the others who are continuing to encourage those who are coming behind. On the platform, Professor Obangoshe, the FP, since we started, Professor Bafemi has been here, Professor Mofolowo has been here. Professor Albert has thanked Professor Femi Otunbanja. I was going to thank him myself, and I'm sure he's still online because I can see his DP. I'd like to thank Professor Otunbanja for joining us, as well as so many of our senior people, Professor Zebaya and others. Of course, I must thank Professor Ogunyemi. I have another Ogunyemi online, Tunji Ogunyemi, who is in my department. I'm hoping that he's also going to speak to us at some point. He's a lawyer, he's a historian. I think he has 2 PhDs, one in history, one in law, something. So I'd like to appreciate Professor Ogunyemi for leading us and starting us off very well today. Our next session is on the 30th of January. And incidentally, our speaker is going to be Professor Albert. It's speaking on remembering, forgetting, and denying in strategic historiography. I'm sure we're going to have another interesting session at that time. On that note, let me say thank you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again very soon. We're going to develop a database of those who are registered for this program so that you automatically get invited to our next set of dialogue sessions. Thank you very much, and good night.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Good night, sir. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Good night, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank
good
you,
night.
Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Good night, sir.
Good night. How are
Yes, sir.
you?
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Good night, sir. Yes, sir.
Hey.
Bye. Yes, sir.
Global scholar.
Yes, sir.
Good night,
Akadede,
sir.
sir. Good night. Thank you, sir.
Global
How are you,
scholar.
sir?
Bye, though.
Very
Thank
much.
you, sir.
Good night.
Good
Yeah.
night.
Professor Adejide, Ekale.
Ekale. Thank you very much. I
Ekalema.
really enjoyed it.
Ekale ma, Eka Tijo. How are you, ma?
Professor Ola Ogunyemi, Happy New Year, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes,
Happy New Year.
God bless you, sir.
God bless
Professor Ola Ogunyemi.
my sister. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
bye.
Okay. Láyọ̀ ni gbogbo a máa pàdé o.
Àmín.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thank you, Bumi.
Àgbọ̀, ẹ ṣé.
Okay.